humans, it's your host Kory, and before we jump into this week's episode, I just wanted to let you know that my new book, A Well Cared For Human, is now available on pre-order. Depending on when you see this, it might already be available for purchase, but I wanted you to know that the book was out into the world for you. If you've been loving what we've been talking about on the podcast, please check out the book, not only because it's nicely well organized and packaged. The episodes are episodic, and so it's kind of all over the place, different topics for different weeks as they come to me, but the book is nice and organized by section and chapter and really gives you a better overview of what it's like to have an amazing relationship with yourself. But more importantly, I don't know about you, but when I read self-help books, I like to have something tangible that I can highlight or circle or dog ear and keep coming back to, keep referencing, and so that's why it was really important for me to make this book for you. I wanted you to have something in your hands that you could keep coming back to again and again as you needed. And so please check it out if that's something that you're interested in. And you'll find the links to all of that in my description box below, but you'll also be able to go to my website, awellcaredforhuman.com, and check out the links there as well. But let's jump into this week's episode. Welcome to A Well Cared For Human, the podcast that tries to convince you that you are 100% normal and an even better than okay example of the human species, despite the fact that sometimes we feel like the craziest, most incapable, or worthless creatures on the face of this planet. I'm Kory, an author, a creative, and the host of the show. Whatever you're bringing to the table today, I hope this episode proves to be a dose of inspiration for you on your quest to become a well-cared-for human. You can find the episode show notes, your free wellness blueprint, and more at awellcaredforhuman.com. And as always, thank you for listening. Hello humans, it's your host Kory, and this week we're going to talk about the 4 attributes of a great relationship with yourself. But before I leap into that, I just want to point out that I had to pick a time to do this episode, and it's not perfect. Between the construction workers outside my house digging up something to do with the water main, and then my neighbors are all cutting their grass today. It's probably going to rain or something like that. And also, I don't know if you can hear it, but there's a squirrel right outside my window losing its mind about something. And so I couldn't find a perfect time to make this episode for you, but I figured better to make an episode than to give you nothing at all. So forgive me in advance for any kind of issues with the audio quality that you might hear on today's episode. It's just the sounds of summer. It's just me, a woman in her house on a summer day, making this for you. So just please give me a little bit of grace. If I could make it perfect, I absolutely would. And this is probably something to think about when we just try to live imperfectly, right? We don't always get things exactly the way we want them. And so this is a good reminder that I too do not get things exactly the way that I want them. But it's still important to put our gifts out into the world for others. And so we're going to do that. Now, thinking about the 4 attributes of a healthy relationship with yourself. And so I talk a lot about what it means to have a great relationship with yourself on the podcast, that the whole point of building the 4 pillars is to build this great relationship with yourself. But how do we do that? Because if we don't know what we're investing in, if we don't know what we're trying to create, then it's really difficult to think about where we're going to apply our time, where we're going to apply our energy, and what it is exactly that we're trying to build. And so there are 4 characteristics of a great relationship with yourself, and so let's talk about those. The first one is honesty. Now, what does honesty mean in the context of having a great relationship with yourself? So honesty means being able to be very honest with yourself about where you are and what you're feeling. A lot of the times we downplay our experiences or we downplay our emotions because we feel like we're not allowed to have them, we're not allowed to be in that space, we're trying to push through. Sometimes this also comes as false positivity. So maybe someone's like, oh, you'll be fine, everything's great, but you're obviously not. So false positivity is also being dishonest with yourself. Now, there are many reasons why you might have been forced to be dishonest with yourself. For example, with me, growing up with a narcissistic parent, I wasn't allowed to have the feelings that I was having. I wasn't allowed to express what I wanted or what I needed. And so there was a lot of suppression involved, a lot of me negating or telling myself like, oh, it doesn't matter, it's okay, I'll be fine. A lot of pushing to the side what was really going on. And so that created a bit of dishonesty. Another thing that created dishonesty was this sense that I was in survival mode, and so I couldn't really pay attention to what was really needed to be done because I was so focused on just trying to get through the moments. And then also something that's difficult for children in particular who are in abusive situations, which is that when everyone around you is in this sort of chaotic way of living, you're not really allowed to think about yourself in any contextual way. So you're not allowed to think about, what do I need? Am I okay with this? Because you're so dependent on your parents or your caregivers for your needs. You can't go against your parents or your family and express what it is that you need, what you honestly want, what is important for your own well-being, because that might cost you severely. So for example, when I had these interactions with my narcissistic father, if I was trying to express to him an honest need, for example, like, I need you to not speak to me the way that you do. It really hurts me when you tear me down, when you criticize me the way that you do. If I had said that to my narcissistic father at any point in my life, he would have been like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know how good you have it. He would have immediately negated it, first and foremost. But then secondly, he could have also withdrawn his love. So maybe he would have stopped talking to me. Maybe he would find other ways to punish me. He would maybe threaten not to give me lunch money or something. And so the point is that there are punishments that are going to be unique to each person, but the idea that sometimes there were real consequences to trying to be honest about what I needed or what I felt. And so that might have also been the case for you, where in these instances you were trying to be honest with people, but there were repercussions. And so you pulled back. You thought, okay, I can't be honest with these other people. I can't even be honest with myself because I can't afford to think about it. It's too upsetting. And so that pushback from others, that rejection of basically a space to be honest in, if that wasn't present for you, it would eventually turn inward into where you aren't even able to be honest with yourself. Because how painful would that be if you were to acknowledge, I'm not happy like this, I'm not well like this, I need so much more than this, but then also being trapped in your circumstances. And so it would have been easier for most of us to look away from that and pretend like it wasn't happening than to confront that difficult and heartbreaking reality head on. So that's some of the issues, I guess, that go into what would create dishonesty, why we would be dishonest. It's not always like you're just lying to yourself to lie to yourself. It's often very painful or difficult to look at things as they are, and so we sweep it under the rug or we turn away from it. But that is dishonesty in its base form, so to speak. Now, in addition to dishonesty, another thing to think about is mistrust. So trust is the second component of having a great relationship with yourself. Its counterpart is mistrust. So again, sticking with the example of a narcissistic father, he taught me to distrust my feelings, my perceptions, my views. So if I expressed something like, I don't think you should treat me that way, or I don't think I should have to go through that, I think what you're doing is abusive, he would gaslight me to the point to where I was confused about what I had even experienced. He would convince me that my abuse wasn't abuse. And so we have many people like this in our life, not just narcissists, but also toxic people of any kind. Maybe you had a cheater, or you had someone who was just mistreating you in some capacity. They might try to convince you, in order to not take responsibility for what they've done, that, oh no, it was you. You got it wrong. You saw the situation wrong. You don't know what's going on. It's you. And so if they do this enough, we're exposed to it enough that we actually start to distrust what we're thinking, we're feeling. We're like, am I wrong? I thought they were cheating on me, but did I get it wrong? Am I confused? Oh no, it's not. And so we distrust ourselves rather than trust what we're feeling, what we are pretty sure of, because we don't want those negative repercussions. It's more important for us to maintain that connection and that love with the other person than to trust ourselves, which can again lead to painful consequences. After honesty and trust, there's respect. So respect in the context of a healthy relationship with yourself is, do you respect yourself enough not to hurt yourself? And many of us don't respect ourselves enough not to hurt ourselves. Part of the reasons why we don't respect ourselves has to do with the same factors that we see in the dishonesty and the mistrust, which is that someone or many people possibly have convinced us that it's not safe to be honest, that we can't trust ourselves, that our views are wrong, that our understanding of situations are incorrect. And so we also don't respect ourselves for the same reason, because we think we're getting it wrong and we think we can't afford to be honest. We think we can't afford to do these things. And so when we treat ourselves like the problem, like everything that's happening to me is my fault, or everything that's happening to me is because I'm a worthless person, or I don't deserve to have this, and this, that low self-esteem, that low self-confidence, all of that creates this atmosphere, this experience of disrespect. And so whatever we can do to change that, to change the script from disrespecting ourselves to respecting our needs and wants, that would be moving in the direction of having a great relationship with yourself. And so honesty, trust, respect, and then the last one is communication. Now, communication is twofold. There's communication with other people, and then there's communication with yourself. Now, communication with yourself, kind of like honesty, trust, respect, is, are you listening to yourself? Again, there might be a lot of suppression involved, a lot of stuffing your feelings down, a lot of looking away from things that are too painful to look at. And so communication is, you have to learn how to look at those things again. You have to learn how to listen to yourself again. If we were really taught not to trust ourselves or to not respect our own opinions or experiences, then we're not going to know how to listen to ourselves. More importantly, over time, there's a lot of these experiences that create louder voices in our mind. So for example, if you're like me and you're a fearful or anxious person, I can be very afraid sometimes. I can get very anxious, get really panicky in my day-to-day life. When my fear voice is present, it can be a lot louder than my other voice inside, like my loving, my caring, my intuitive voice that knows what it needs, that knows what it wants, that can guide me in the direction of wellness, of healing. I can't hear that voice very well because fear speaks so loud in comparison. It's basically screaming at me, oh my God, do you know what's going to happen if you do this? Fear is just so much louder. And so it can be really hard to learn how to listen to that quieter voice if we've been investing all of our energy and our power into this other, louder, more dramatic voice that's convincing us that the sky is falling every single moment of every day. And so learning to listen to your own voice, that's one layer of open communication. But the second layer is also learning how to communicate your boundaries, your needs, and your wants to other people. Now, again, this might be really hard to do because in the past you might have been convinced that it wasn't safe to be honest. It wasn't safe to trust your instincts, to look at what you really needed, what you really wanted. It might not have been safe to express ways for other people to be respectful of your needs, of your wants. And so, for example, again, going back to my family dynamics, I wasn't allowed to communicate my needs to other people. I just wasn't allowed to have them. There was no room for needs in my life, either because, again, my narcissistic father expected complete submission in our day-to-day lives, and so everything was needed to be second. Everything that I needed was second to what he needed or what he wanted. But also, more importantly, even with my mother, who never treated me that way, she still had a lot of mental health issues. She was struggling with addiction, with alcohol use, and so she was still very focused on herself and trying to get herself through the day. And so there was no space for me to really express that I needed this or this, so there was still neglect. So it doesn't really matter the perspective of your abuser or the person who mistreated you, I guess is my point, is that it doesn't have to be that they are malicious and that they just created no space for you to have needs or wants. It could also just be that that was the situation, that they had enough going on for themselves, that they were kind of wrapped up in their own world, and so they just didn't have any room to hear what you needed to affirm you in any kind of loving way. And so whatever your experiences were, whether they were difficult situations with your family or friends, or maybe you had a really toxic work environment, or maybe you had relationships that were not the healthiest in their dynamics. Maybe there was some cheating or something involved, some deception, some lies. Lots of reasons could have come up in the point of your life, any point of your life, to create this sense that it's not safe to be honest. It's not safe to trust yourself. It's not safe to respect yourself or to expect respect from others. And it's not safe to communicate with yourself or with other people. And so all of that has to be addressed in having a healthy relationship with yourself. Moving toward a healthy relationship with ourselves means that we find ways to bring honesty, trust, respect, and communication back into the picture. And that we find ways to cultivate those 4 attributes of having a great relationship with ourselves. Now, how do we do that? How do we cultivate having a great relationship with ourselves that's based on honesty, trust, respect, and open communication? So with honesty, for example, there has to be a certain level of awareness and a certain level of courage to start looking at those difficult things, because there might have been a very good reason why you weren't honest with yourself in the past. Someone must have convinced you or trained you not to be honest with yourself. Either the environment was not possible for that sort of work, or the person itself, the person you're working with, either it was an ex-partner or a family member, coworker, whatever situation, a boss. You weren't allowed to be honest because it wasn't safe to do so. So when you start looking at those feelings, it's not going to be great, right? You're not necessarily going to like reviewing the terrible things that happened that created this atmosphere of dishonesty. But also, you might feel terrible about letting your own needs go for a really long time. And what I mean by that is when I started to look at all the ways I had been dishonest with myself over the years, I escaped my family situation long before I was able to start being honest with myself. And so there was that period of time where the only person really lying to me was me. And that was really painful to look at, because I don't like to think of myself as someone who would hurt myself in that way, who would downplay my own emotions. It didn't matter that I was just doing what the people around me had taught me to do, which is to disregard my needs, downplay my feelings, tell myself everything is fine when it's really not, when I really need to be making changes or standing up for myself. So looking at that and seeing that I really only had myself to blame for this period of time, right? There was this whole childhood history, sure, but there was also this chunk of time where it was just me. I didn't feel good about seeing that. And so that aversion, that not good feeling, has a tendency to create this desire to pull back more, to kind of get away. We're like, I don't really like looking at this. But honesty requires that we continue to look and that we continue to see things head on. So I call that awareness. Being very honest with ourselves about what we're seeing, not sugarcoating it, not making it worse, but also not making it better, just being clear about what this really is. So I would advise that if you do need to work with honesty with yourself, being honest with where you are, there's ways to do that very gently. You don't need to traumatize yourself. Do not do what I do, which is where you get really hard. You decide you're going to do something, and then you start getting really hard or really obsessed with doing it, because that's not really the most gentle way to deal with yourself. Deal with yourself like you would a friend who maybe invited you over to clean up their really messy house. Maybe they had floor-to-ceiling junk in a particular room and they're just completely overwhelmed. You wouldn't come in and be like, wow, you're a terrible person. You have all this junk. You wouldn't be really harsh to your friend. You wouldn't be cruel. You'd just be like, okay, let's take it step by step, one box at a time. Let's see what we've got here. Let's figure out what we're going to do, work out our strategy, and just be very gentle and loving and kind to yourself with the honesty process, because honesty is really hard. I can't tell you how many people are moving through this world lying to themselves about who they are, what they want, what they need. So we don't need to be that person, first and foremost. But secondly, we also don't need to be really hard on ourselves as we move away from those habits that create dishonesty. So be gentle with yourself. Try to sit with the uncomfortable feelings of looking at things we don't like to look at, but do it in a moderate paced way. You have your whole life left to become honest with yourselves. Take your time, because once you get the habit of it, once you realize how good honesty feels, because it does feel really good once you process the crap from the past, absolutely. and you start to be honest with yourself in the present, it feels amazing because you're like, oh my God, I don't know how I lived like that before. This is so much better. But it takes a shift to get from where you were to where you're going. So I'm just saying, do that as gently as possible. But really look at your experiences, really figure out where you're downplaying your emotions. Like, where is there a conflict inside you where you know you don't like something or you don't feel good about something, but you're tolerating it anyway? Look at that. Why? Why are you tolerating it? Be really honest with yourself about that answer. Well, I feel like maybe no one will love me if I don't put up this bad behavior from this person. I'm scared to break up with this person and go off in a new direction because I think I'll never find anyone else. So I would rather tolerate their terrible behaviors than X, Y, and Z. And so just think about that. Like, just be honest with where you are, because that would be the first step to gathering the courage to move on to other possibilities, other potential futures that you could have with yourself. And then also being in communication with yourself, learning to listen to yourself, sitting with yourself enough to be like, what's going on with me? What do I hear? Tuning yourself to the smaller, softer voice, not just the fearful voices. So fear comes in and it's very dramatic and it makes a lot of noise and starts banging pots and pans or slamming the window shades up and down or something. Fear's really great at getting our attention. But now you're going to give your attention to the smaller voice, that quieter voice that keeps you on track, that tells you what is important to you, what you need to be happy, healthy, and loved. And so you can direct that attention accordingly. And so those are the 4 attributes of a great relationship with yourself: honesty, trust, respect, and open communication. And how do we create honesty, trust, and respect and open communication in our relationship with ourselves? As we start listening to ourselves, we start valuing our needs, we start prioritizing our needs, we start communicating those needs to other people, we start to believe in our thoughts and feelings and perspectives, we start to respect what it is that we need from other people and from ourselves. And we just have really firm boundaries and commitment and devotion to creating those 4 attributes in our relationship with ourselves. And it's not easy. I'll just be honest. It's not easy because there will always be challenges from other people and from the world to that honesty, trust, respect, and open communication. It's very seductive to be dishonest with yourself when what you have to look at is some really difficult stuff. It's really seductive not to trust yourself when it's easier to think you're the problem than realize that this huge big world with all of its issues is actually to blame, because we can't really do anything about that, and we hate it when we can't do anything about something. But continuing to be committed to building these 4 attributes for yourself is really going to turn around how you feel about yourself. It's going to create more self-confidence, more self-esteem, more self-love. And so just focusing on those 4 attributes would really make a big difference. And I say that because, I get emails and people ask me, like, what can I do to build more self-love? What can I do to build more self-esteem, to be more confident in myself? And naturally, those things will emerge if you're honest with yourself, if you trust yourself, if you respect yourself, and if you communicate well with yourself and communicating your needs to other people, those boundaries. So you don't have to be like, I need to get better self-esteem. I need to get more confident. You don't have to really think about that if you just look at the ways to bring more honesty, trust, respect, and open communication into your life. And that's it for today, dear human. I hope you found this episode useful. And if you did, and you would like to write into the show and let me know about something you're struggling with, I would love to hear from you. Maybe I can feature your topic in an upcoming episode. Otherwise, I will be back next week with another episode of A Well Cared For Human. And until then, please take good care of you. This episode of A Well Cared For Human was written and produced by me, Kory Marie. The music was by Late Night Feeler and Esther Abrami. If you like what I'm doing here, please consider visiting my Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, you get early ad-free access to the episodes, as well as a monthly patrons-only Q&A, bonus videos, and more. Not to mention that your Patreon support lets me know that you find value in the show and want it to continue. You can find me on Patreon by visiting www.patreon.com/Kory Marie. If you can't support the show financially, that is okay. You can still subscribe to the show, leave a review of the show, and recommend the show to your friends, not just the neurotic ones. All of this helps so much. And as always, thank you for listening.